next approach is now rather theory development. So you see that so far we have analyzed mineral supply chain, and we abductively combined mineral specific issues with supply chain specific issues. Now basically what we do now is we take supply chain management as the theory, and we want to understand another field. So it's in line, and that's why it's following up on the minerals example here, while it's in line with this, because again we turn to another body of literature. In this case it is called the base of the pyramid. Base of the pyramid is basically a term that we use for business with the poor or business for the poor, so in poor environments. And this is a typical example which is then in line with arguments of decent work that we see here. So this is also work that we did inside the ICDD. Very brief illustration that we have here. This is the world income pyramid, and we talk of annual income, and surely and clearly even a typical student in Germany would be in the green part already. Yeah, so let's be realistic, we are typically on the rich side, but how do we do business and how do we improve the life of the poor? And that's what this base of the pyramid approach is basically about. Briefly again looking at the method here, I show you that this filtering and searching takes some time. You see that you quite often start with a wider body of data collected, which you then filter. You read the abstracts. In some cases you might even have to read the papers, and then you filter it down, and you see on the slide that we then ended up with a set of 77 papers for the subsequent analysis. One then further dropped out, so 76 was the final work. Now we do almost the same. We use the same framework again, which I explained already. So in this case it is really deductively applied. We borrow this from outside in. And just to point to a criticism already, we do so despite the fact that most parts of the BOP literature were not written against the supply chain perspective. Yeah? In English, some people would say to a hammer everything looks like a nail. So we hammer the supply chain theory over the BOP literature. May this be justified or not? That's a good question. But be aware this would be a typical criticism of such an approach. I explained this already. The only point that you see now added here already is the frequencies that we found. So once more, 76 papers, not too much supply chain orientation, which you can see here. So this is what I just defined already. We do so despite the fact that we explain a body of literature from a different lens. This is the strength as well as the weakness of the method at the same time. I don't have to go through all of these findings. Let me rather turn to, we did the same then again. You put the frequencies into SPSS. You look at which factors are contingent to each other. And this is what I will explain here a bit more into detail. The first one that we found is through the bottom line and life cycle assessment being connected to each other. This is a bit of a sideline. And let me be honest, I would most likely not mention it in the paper anymore because it's an outlier. Turning more to the center, it gets really interesting. So if you want to have long-term relationships, then you have to look at enhanced communication and you have to manage your stakeholders. That sounds really straightforward, isn't it? If you then connect it further, we have another box where it's almost a triangle among supply chain partner development. Take care of the partners. What needs do they have? How do you develop them further? Both economically, socially, avoiding environmental misconduct at the same time. We need learning and innovation, therefore. That sounds quite right. And you can best almost do so by turning to technological integration, looking at what technology do they really need. Technological integration is then further connected into logistical integration. Yeah? Joint development appears here additionally with a link to innovation. So we have a nice argument on all of this needs to go together, really making sense, particularly in the environment that I specified. We have a link of logistical integration into monitoring. Now you cannot just let your lorry go whenever, wherever, but you also have to make sure it arrives on time. And let's say, particularly in the example that I took up already on transporting milk, you have to make sure it's there in time so that the milk is still in good condition. We then find a further link into standards and certification. That is also quite understandable. Particularly, we have seen this in examples when products are then sold internationally. Then you have to to meet, for example, staying in the food industry, you have to meet all of the food standards and the hygiene standards in all of the countries. That even holds for our packaging. So a food packaging has to meet the full standard of the food itself for hygiene, which is straightforward. If you think about it, you don't want to consume anything different. Yeah? And last but not least, we see another link between joint relationships, long-term relationships, and joint development. If you invest into long-term relationships, then you have the chance to do joint development again for processes and products and drive this forward and develop this further. So we see how this makes sense, and we used a framework deductively and now can interpret the specific elements inside this particular field of application, the base of the pyramid, and see that this makes sense, and we gain an understanding of what is happening in the base of the pyramid beyond what each single paper is talking about by looking at them in an aggregated manner. And that's one of the strengths of this method.